Hey everyone, welcome to Operations, the show where we look under the hood of companies in hypergrowth. My name is Sean Lane. It's funny how certain stereotypes can emerge about different roles in your organization, how people talk about operators or salespeople or marketers. They have these preconceived notions that spread from company to company, and those are only cemented further by the memes and snarky posts that you see on LinkedIn. But what if a brand new type of leader was pushing back on some of these stereotypes? On today's episode, we are talking to not one, but two incredibly accomplished sales leaders who are doing just that. My guests today are Will Magnuson and Anna Randall, both sales leaders at TigerEye, the go-to-market planning platform. Will is the CRO and Anna is the VP of sales. And their partnership goes back years. In fact, they've been working together since 2015, and this is their third company together, starting at PlanGrid, then Autodesk, and now TigerEye. I was excited to talk to Will and Anna about the stereotypes they're challenging with how sales leaders are participating in and ultimately taking ownership of the sales planning process. And these two are not only have years of experience of doing this together across three different companies, but they now have exposure to way more companies through their prospects and customers that they talk to at TigerEye. In our conversation, we talk about how sales leaders can be owners of and not just recipients of the sales planning process. We talk about how hard it is to balance the planning process while still hitting your numbers in Q4, and how a sales leader's attitude about the plan will ultimately reflect how their team feels about it. To start, though, I recognize that Will and Anna didn't necessarily have all this knowledge and perspective when they first started in sales. So I wanted to understand how they think about sales planning now versus earlier in their careers. Here's Will.
It's funny. I think earlier in my career as a rep, especially, even as a frontline manager, I thought, that the number was made up of a magic black box. All of a sudden, this huge number came out of the clouds and we all have to deal with it as sales reps. And really that's not the case. The more you get exposed to the process, you realize how much care and how much work folks are putting into it, from your finance team, your CEO, founders group, along with the board of directors, and then your entire leadership team. Everyone plays a stake in it. And so really seeing how that sausage is made and realizing how many opinions are made and how much collaboration there really is and can be, showcases that it's not, yes, these numbers are always hard to achieve, but at the same time, there's a lot of care going into it. And so I think part of the understanding is really, really understanding how it's made so that you can help the team understand how it's come to made, so you can humanize the plan a little bit more than what it is today.
And Anna, I would imagine that flip from black box to knowing that there's actually a process behind the numbers that get pushed out, that's part one. But then once hey, there's this process happening behind the scenes somewhere, I kind of want to be a part of that. How do you make that jump from just realizing that there is a process to actually being an active participant in it and learning how to be an active participant in it?
Yeah, I think part of that is timing, realizing that planning isn't something that happens in a matter of weeks, maybe not even in a single month, but it's very continual. So trying to find ways to insert yourself into everything that adds up to planning, whether that's your biannual focal review, your individual one-on-ones, cross collaboration with different departments to understand where their pulse is on planning. Every department has a different peak for when things become heightened, whether it's marketing in Q3 for the Q4 push or the sales process in Q4 to get the year to finish out right. Timing is everything with all of that.
And one thing I could add, Sean, if in there is that I think with healthy organizations, that everyone's involved in planning. You might not feel part of that meeting, but as Anna mentioned, your one-on-ones you're having with the team, the frontline management team, making sure that they're bubbling up all the problems or all the successes that are happening. That all can happen behind closed doors, but every meeting that you have place with your manager is really important to speak on what's stopping you from selling and what's helping you from selling at that point in time, so that you can double down on what you're doing good at and then fix the problems that you have. So I think the big notion is that planning is only for senior leadership. That's not the case at all. Everybody's involved in it.
Planning is something that everyone is involved in. And let's not just be satisfied by having a plan. It's about planning well. There are so many teams that need to contribute in order to produce a thoughtful, strategic, and aligned plan for your organization. And from my experience, planning is not something you're good at right away. You need years of reps and sets at the planning process in order to get better. And Will and Anna have now gone through planning cycles together for years across multiple companies, not to mention all the prospects and customers they now talk to through their work at TigerEye. So what have they learned about when planning goes well and when it doesn't? Let's start with Will.
Yeah, I think it's like building up calluses in your hand, like doing yard work. Like, you get the stronger you get. It's no different than exercising or anything else out there. You build a tolerance and you understand quickly where to go. So I think doing more reps, you understand like what's going to be the high value points of it all so that you can quickly get down to the solution, and being able to understand communication down to the rep level and making sure that everyone is involved in it, but also understand what is the biggest needle mover. Is it going to be hiring more people? Is it going to be segmenting your business? Trying to figure out what your North Star is really important early on in the planning process, because as soon as you get that North Star, the planning is all made on that North Star. It could be a revenue number, could be number of net new logos you're going after. It could be that you want to segment your business in a different way. And so then everyone can play from that same sheet of music. And then it allows you to have that communication style best appropriately to the frontline management that can help make those decisions with you.
The other thing that you learn over time is how to connect the past to the future. So if your team is constantly under-resourced in one area, and that's what you're hearing from AEs and BDs and your CSMs, all these people are complaining that there's something preventing them from being successful in this past sales cycle. It's kind of like, how do you bring that forward and advocate for that so that going into the next year, that's something that can be resolved. And being able to connect the years, year over year, there's a compound interest in that, in solving those problems long term. And obviously businesses ebb and flow, and they have to adjust to markets and to unpredictable times and things like that. But it's one of those things that every year you get a little bit better at solving one problem, and that flows into the next fiscal year.
And the last thing I'll mention real quick is that I think early on, when you're first doing this, you want to run away from the problems. And I think it's the exact opposite. Run towards the problems, solve those problems, because you have a whole nother batch that's coming right after. So you can't run away from the issues. There are always going to be issues.
I think the other thing that compounds in those situations is the institutional knowledge, right? And the longer someone is at the company and the more planning cycles they've been a part of, the more they can articulate to the rest of the group the context that was true when those earlier decisions were made. Because some of these decisions are multi-year time horizon type decisions, right? So like if your company says, okay, we want to get better at selling multi-year deals instead of single-year deals, like that's not something that's going to happen in a quarter, right? And you have to know the context that decision was made 2 years ago to know that actually where we are right now is actually really good compared to where we were all those cycles ago, right? And so I think that institutional knowledge is really helpful. And the other thing that's awesome about having both of you here together is like, Will, you kind of took it from the tops down approach of like, okay, these are the big bets for the company for the year that now a lot of the planning decisions have to be made from. And then Anna, you took it from the bottoms up perspective, which is like, we have to talk to everybody on the team and learn all of the different challenges they saw from last year's version of the plan. And I would imagine, Anna, when you're doing that bottoms up planning, a huge part of that has to be your partnership with ops, right? Especially if you're new to a business and you're trying to learn all the different components that make up that bottoms up plan. Can you just talk about kind of what you found to be the ingredients for a successful partnership with ops teams?
It comes down to really two things for me. It's consistency in the plan. So if you're constantly moving the goalpost, whether that's different incentives for, like you said, multi-year deals or some sort of spiff on a product that you're trying to promote, it's trying to change rep behavior. All of that, that comp plan changes drive behavioral changes. And when you keep doing that, it's hard to get good at one particular thing. So making sure there's a limitation to whatever change might be coming down the pipeline. And then two, it's clean data, making sure that whatever they are pulling from and decisions they're making, whether it's the assignment of quota in a particular region based on renewal volume is clear and clean, and that you've got a good working relationship to review all that stuff ahead of time. Sometimes it gets set in motion and cannot get undone before it's really reviewed by both sides of the house.
A limited number of changes and clean data. These are important prerequisites to keep in mind as you and your company go through your next planning cycle. If you're trying to change 6 or 7 different behaviors or make 9 different key assumptions in your plan, guess what? There's just no way you're going to be successful. For one, people can't digest that much change. And second, you likely aren't going to be able to give each of those assumptions in the plan the attention that they deserve. So follow Anna's advice and get everyone to buy in on a small number of changes that are supported by clean data. Okay, let's assume you're starting to do all of this well and a plan is taking shape. Before you can roll this thing out to the broader organization, now's the moment when you have to get all of the cross-functional leaders to put their hands in the middle and say, yes, we're committing to this plan. This is not a step you can skip, nor is it something that's easy to declare victory on. So I wanted to know from Will and Anna's perspective as sales leaders, how they go about this.
And I think the best part about in sales leadership, our job in sales, whether you've been a rep forever or a manager, what it may be, is that your job is to help understand human intuition, emotional intelligence, so that you understand how people communicate. So your finance director is going to communicate a little bit differently than your rev ops or your marketing director. And so your job is to read the room and understand where you fit in, push back when there needs to be pushback. And healthy discourse is great because it challenges certain aspects of it all. And everyone should always have healthy discourse that comes in. But then there comes to a point where, the number is a number at this point. We have to operationalize this, and you have to either agree and commit, disagree and commit, but you're all on the same team. That comes down to it because everyone plays a role with it, whether it be the marketing and number of leads you get or opportunities or awareness that's being driven, the rev ops to help make the comp plan correct, the finance to make sure we're counting all the numbers correctly and making sure people are getting paid on time, but also we're looking at the right net new business. And so I think just understanding each role's pain points and what they're trying to solve can help bring the group together and then allow you to go attack it as a team and really give the broader message. Those are the planning cycles that are most successful when everyone leaves the room saying, like, I get the other person's perspective, so that when a team member understands how did this all happen, you can say, well, the finance team really cares about this and here's why they care about it. You bring that how and why together across departmental, you have a really good synergy and a good plan to move forward with.
And I think sometimes the hardest part is that there's a lot of time spent on what the plan is going to be, what the numbers are, what the metrics are, the number, the math of it all. How do we get to that next level as a company? And I think sometimes that eats up a lot of the planning cycle, and we spend less time focusing on how are we going to do that. It's great to say in theory, every rep's going to grow their quota by, 500K this next year, but how are they going to do that in reality? How am I going to set them up for success? And the sooner we can get to the what as a team, and whether, again, agree and commit, disagree and commit, the what needs to be established so that you can spend more of the time as department leads talking about how you get there. And that cross collaboration is really priceless to make sure you're on the same page.
Yeah. And the last thing I'll mention real quick is that you all have to remember that planning usually takes part during the busiest quarter of the year, which is Q4. Now, most organizations have larger Q4s than they do Q1s and Q2s. And so you're doing this all while doing your regular day job, which you could say planning is part of your regular day job, but Q4s are high stress environments. They're usually the ones you want to have the biggest forecast output. You want to help your reps get to their numbers. Everyone's time crunched down to it. So it's really making sure you understand from the human side of things, like how tapped people are, because Q4 is a busy time period for everybody.
Such a good point. And I do want to come back, Anna, to the how of all of this in a second. But I think something I heard from both of you, which I would not have thought this way before, is the idea that, yes, Anna, to your point, this is such a data-driven, spreadsheet-heavy exercise. But what you both are saying is, look, like, sales leaders actually have, just through their natural inclinations and the job that they do every day, like they have a unique skill set that they can bring into this process that is not just based on what's in the spreadsheets, but it is that emotional intelligence that you were talking about, Will. And I'm just curious what you have learned, both of you, about like what else sales leaders bring to the table that is unique to your role. And maybe, Anna, I'll start with you on that. Just like, I think it's because it is so much not just about those spreadsheets that it's important to remember the unique perspectives that everybody can bring, and not just like, oh, this person's from marketing, this person's from sales, but like their actual skill sets.
I think from a sales side, you really build a muscle of empathy and compromise. So coming together and maybe taking a concession on how the comp plan works, because it's going to overspend if people hit this particular accelerator, like making a concession in that sense, but also maybe getting a number lowered for your team so something else is more attainable. So these trade-offs that you make lean into your natural sales tendency of how you negotiate an opportunity altogether. And I think the empathy part comes in because we're really good listeners. Salespeople do hopefully far more listening than they do talking. But it allows you to sit in a room and really synthesize information quickly and hear what all of the stakeholders have to say.
And Will, you and I have chatted before, and some of those are like the natural sales skill sets and the natural things that people I think would think of. But you've also told me that you also need to challenge kind of some of those like sales leader stereotypes and actually dig in and get in the weeds and get in the data. And the best sales leaders are the ones that can do that.
Yeah, I think there's always a misconception in any sales environment that sales team, I look at it like a Scrooge McDuck just sitting in a bunch of coins and like it's so easy. But I think what people don't realize is that barrel is empty at the beginning of the year that comes in there. And so I think your role in sales leadership is to expose, I call it backwards math essentially. So you want me to get to X number, but how does that actually happen? Well, it takes place and that means our average sales cycle is 90 days and that takes 5 demos per cycle. And therefore we get our first one. And so really exposing to the broader team of how this is actually done and how you get to your number, not just how many close won opportunities, but how many meetings have to take place, how many technical evaluations, how long is your pilot period? And what it does, it humanizes to the entire team who's making the plan. Oh, there's only 40 hours in a work week. They can only do X amount. There's only so much TAM available here. And if we try to stretch this too many new logos, let's focus on renewals instead of new logos that comes in there. Your job in sales leadership is to expose the actual sales process. That's not just 90 days and closed one, but what is behind that 90 days? What activities take place from your team? And if you are in the weeds and you understand how many demos or how many technical evaluations that get exposed, then you can bring that to the team and they're going to take you more seriously than just lower my number, because every sales leader wants a lower number. That's inherent of what we want. But that's a stereotype to everybody else that says they just want a lower number because they want to make X amount more dollars. No, they want a lower number or they want things that can actually be attainable, because the higher the number is, the more we achieve, the better the company does, whether it's publicly traded or privately held.
Okay, there's so much to unpack there. First, Will and Anna are pleading with sales leaders to both lean into their natural sales strengths, empathy, negotiation, and simultaneously challenge the typical hand-waving generalities that people think of when they think of sales leaders. They want you to challenge these stereotypes by being detail-oriented. And to do that, they think that sales leaders have to get in the weeds of how the nuances of the sales process will impact the funnel metrics in the plan. Will says that you can't just say, hey, I want the number to be lower. You have to articulate the why and the how for when you arrive at that conclusion. And by going through this work, the outcomes that I would expect are twofold. First, you increase your operational command of your business through the exposure that comes with the planning process. And second, you'll emerge from this process feeling like an owner of the plan and not a recipient. You know which numbers have to move in order for the plan to come true, and then it's your job to figure out the how. And Anna said that you have to be selective in how you'll pull that off.
I think it's all about prioritizing those KPIs in terms of actionable reality. So if you just tell a rep, increase the sales price, that's not exactly just going to come true by putting it out there, verbally. So it's really involving your BD team, making sure you've got enough at bats, bringing your CSMs into the conversation. If you have an enablement team, making sure you're enabling them to sell to the strongest price point. Maybe the value propositions need to be dusted off and, brought up to speed and where the product is today. There's all sorts of different things, but then it's going to be your job to go out and look at these other departments and see who else is going to be on your bench to be able to get to that goal. Because it's definitely not single threaded. No single sales leader can just wave a wand and make something change in the process. It takes a whole team doing it together. And then the proof is in the accomplishment. So making sure that the rep that gets there is, rewarded or highlighted, given an opportunity to talk about why and sharing that across the team. Sales doesn't stop. So while you're trying to coach somebody to do something different, they're mid-cycle on half of these other things that are going on. So this flywheel of doing and learning and growing while doing your job is complicated and it's complex. But the more stakeholders you have that are bought in accomplishing those single top level goals, the better the team will be because they'll be supported from all sides.
If you look at your revenue teams, how do you think they're doing with pipeline management? A lot can go into this, and if you think there are areas where they could improve, you and your sales leaders may want to check out Ascender. Ascender is by the team at Force Management. It's an online subscription platform that offers courses, short-form content like videos and blogs, as well as a community where Force's sales experts weigh in on rep questions and deal challenges. You can learn more by visiting ascender.co/ops. Okay, back to Anna and Will. Before the break, Anna and Will were taking us through how a sales leader can successfully participate in the planning process. We talked about the importance of clean data, we talked about how sales leaders can partner effectively with ops, and we covered the importance of challenging the sales stereotypes and being owners of the plan itself. Let's assume for a moment that all of this has gone well. Now, there's this whole group of people who report to Will and Anna who are waiting to hear what the plan is. And to Will's point from earlier in our conversation, it can't just feel like this plan emerged out of the clouds with no forethought. So how should sales leaders translate all of the complexity and nuance of the planning process into a tight, cohesive, and compelling message that they can share with their teams? Short answer, it's hard.
Yeah, it's tough. I think there's two philosophies here. Less is more, and your attitude will reflect how the team feels about it. So when it comes down to less is more, there's a couple of key KPIs or cornerstones of that plan. Focus on those side of things with it, and really think it out on how each person. There's a broader team sense of how you roll it out, and then each manager should be meeting individually with each person to go through how they achieve that, because it all bubbles up with it. And so making sure you communicate that appropriately and let and explain a little bit of how this, how it was all made, the meetings that took place, who was involved, that it wasn't just a black box number that was made, that it was well thought out. But don't go into a crazy amount of detail, because then people will start maybe poking some certain holes in it, or more or less like you've lost them at that point. But the biggest thing you can do as a leader is talk about how attainable that goal is, because all goals are meant to be attained. There's a path to every number, and you have to really buy into that and be excited about it. It's no different than a sales rep who's really excited about selling their product. People, sales reps who are really just loving what they sell, they sell more. They believe in that message. And the same thing goes for leadership when it comes to the plan. It's always going to feel like Mount Everest, because it's the beginning of the sales year. You're at $0 or you're at 2 million or whatever it may be. It's always going to look really hard, but sales is a marathon. It's not a sprint. If you deal with it in sprints, then you are going to get burnt out super quick, and you can have a great Q1. Yeah. You have a great Q1, but you might not perform Q2, Q3, and Q4. So I think it's just simply explaining the key highlights and how it was made, and just know that expose a little bit of how it was done, and then your attitude towards it. You can't be a leader who goes and says, this goal can't be happening, but good luck, guys. That's never the way to go with it. You can say it's aggressive. You can say it's going to be hard to attain. We're going to have hard work towards it, but we're all in this together. And that really rallies the team around you.
The coordination of the day that you roll out your quotas or your plan it's interesting, right? There's a behind the scenes that goes on from top down to frontline managers. And the higher the transparency and the higher the buy-in prior to that day, the better I've seen the outcome. Meaning you get the managers, you let them vent about it. You have to let every level of the organization from top down absorb and vent in their own capacity of like, and then try to start to think like, how am I going to break this down? How am I going to individualize this for the people that report to me? How am I going to get my buy-in to this company plan, make sure they ask the right questions. They have room to ask the questions that they are anticipating are going to be asked of them, but also maybe of their own plan. Sometimes we forget that frontline managers carry their own quota. It's their own, dollars on the line for their variable income. And same with second line VPs. Anybody that has a variable, income knows that they need to ask good questions about how they get to that OTE. So I think breaking it down and doing it in layers is super important. But on the day that it gets to the AEs, to the ICs, to the front line, it's really about having tactically put ourselves in their shoes, making sure we've broken down the plan, and whether it's an individualized path to plan or globalized for the team. Hey, here's the key things that I think are going to be the how we get to the what number, and thinking ahead about that kind of stuff. Also, make sure this is where tying in with the RevOps team, making sure if there were changes in the comp plan, whether it's changing how you get paid out altogether or whether or not you've dropped a multi-year variable or any of that kind of stuff, why that happened and how that will impact them. Understanding the intention of it and how that ties into the company initiatives is a really good way to get the buy-in from the AE. So if the company needs more cash on hand, and so you're going to be looking for people to pay up front and you're going to be incentivized for that versus, I don't know, recurring quarterly billing or something like that, explaining to them, this is the ultimate end goal of the company. That's why we're going to implement this process. This is what we're going to be marching towards this year. Helping them get that company buy-in, even from an IC level, can help steer everyone towards that North Star. And I think cohesively, when you're working together, it's just a lot more fun. If the whole team is, attaining their goals and they're doing the things that the company's asked of them. We've all had those years, and those years are great. In the years where the questions are left unanswered, there's discord through all of Q1, sometimes through the whole first half. And that can really break a year altogether.
And you have to remember too, this is usually happening during Q1, which as a manager, this is the hardest time period because everyone is embracing for change, whether you have a change in quota, maybe your accounts, maybe there's a promotion you're going for. It's a big HR cycle with performance reviews that are happening. So there's a lot of angst towards it. So my suggestion to anybody is during this time period, lead with empathy. Understand that people feel that there's a lot of change happening, and change promotes certain behaviors and angst and anxiety that happens there. And that's okay. Everyone deals with it in different ways. And so approaching it with empathy and understanding that you realize that maybe you've been left in the dark a little bit helps them understand a little bit more, feel more connected to the company, that they feel part of as truly one team.
I mean, I think the punchline here is just planning and launching these plans is so hard, right? There's so many layers to what you guys just described. You have to get the company-wide why in front of them. What's the thing we're all marching towards? Then at every single layer of leadership from CRO down to IC, you have to make sure you understand the why at each one of those levels and their individual tiers path to their particular goals. Then you have to communicate it in a way that, Will, to use your less is more. I used to coach my teams on being transparent but succinct, right? Like you can say it in 60 seconds, say it in 30, try it again, right? Like keep getting it down and down and down. But then to your point, Anna, you've got all this knowledge of the process so that when they do ask the follow-up questions, that's when you can show off the details and the thought that went into this process itself. And there are a couple of things I wanted to follow up with you on, Anna, on what you were saying. So you talked about kind of that partnership with RevOps as you're rolling these things out. Everybody's different, right? But I'm curious, what's your preference there around both the prep and the actual communication to your team of this information, right? Some leaders want to own it and they want to be the one that stands in front of their teams and delivers. Some folks want that ops person there either as a backup or for them to kind of lead the charge on the details while the sales leader kind of gives that more of a high level. What's your approach there? Because I feel like it can be very different.
I think in a healthy environment, you want both teams there. You want both sides of the fence, that partnership. Those are the people that your team is reaching out to when they've got, problems with their orders. They need approvals. They've got things that need to like jump through hoops, or maybe some data that they need cleaned up. They're their teammate, right? So I think on some level, having them there shows that there's unity at the top level of the leadership. However, I also think there's a room to have one-on-one conversations and create that safe space for trust. I don't know if that's in skip level conversations or, kind of that all hands setting where you get maybe a Q&A in there. I think you can get creative with these meetings. Maybe it's not just like a roll call of here's your number, but a true, ask me anything from a RevOps perspective after the team has had a chance to absorb and hopefully work through any emotions that they might have about it. But I think that that partnership is important to show off in front of the team that you are united and that you can't just pin things against one another. It's like two parents. You can't just be like, one parent said this and then one parent said that. You want to be a united front to everybody.
This unified front between ops and sales is so important, not just in these conversations, but throughout the entire year. Too often, ops adopts this weird policing responsibility, and ops can become an easy scapegoat for sales leaders to point to when things are hard or when a plan didn't turn out as reps had anticipated or hoped for. What Anna's saying is you have to be aligned with one another in these situations. And Will correctly points out that your attitude as a leader will reflect how the team feels. What adds, of course, to the challenges of the rollout of your plan is, as Will pointed out, you're working on all of this planning stuff during Q4 when all anyone wants to spend time on is on Q4 deals. The flip side of that is if you don't give planning the time it requires and deserves, you wake up in the third month of the new year still haggling over the details of that year's plan. And I promise you, no one likes living in that type of sales purgatory. According to Will, once that happens to you once, you never want it to happen to you again.
Yeah, that's the hard part. That's the most challenging part. And I think at the end of the day, like we talked earlier about, do you get better at sales planning as it goes on? And I think you might go through a rough cycle where you say, I never want to do that again. I never want to give my reps their comp plan on April 30th and Q1's done. Because it does happen. Things slip away going through. So maybe you start the process earlier, or maybe you put an objective in front and say, we're going to finish this all done. I think one of the hardest things is in planning today is that as you're closing out that big quarter, big things happen. Deals push, deals happen. And so assumptions that you're making for the last 6 months then change instantly. And you don't have time to go back to the drawing board. And so this is where I think planning has a chance to be modernized a lot more with real-time information that allows you to change on the fly versus having to sit there in your Excel spreadsheet and go, I'm already so far down this rabbit hole, I can't change it. And that's a problem because that spreadsheet's over pivoted or has too much going on. And so I think the key thing is if you are stuck in a situation where you are 2 months into Q1, you don't have your comp plans, you need to, as a leader, understand what that could be looking like, help your team understand the priorities they should be going after, and make it simple. Don't overcomplicate it. Have 2 or 3 things. Set your own targets because you know the baseline of the plan a little bit. So put it out there. Don't scare anybody, but put it out there and then have them run towards it so that they're not shell-shocked April 12th, 10th, or whatever it may be, because that's the worst thing ever if that could happen, because then you have high turnover. And so people want transparency to a point so they can feel involved in it. And then that allows them to feel more connected. And you can't have these turnover that happens with reps. If we assume that person was going to stay and then they leave, your plan's already off to a bad start.
Which I would imagine is where, some sort of software tool might come in handy for those types of unexpected curveballs, right? And I would imagine you guys are customer number one of your own tool. And so when you two are thinking about that really tricky moment in time, but realistically, I think to your point, Will, about unexpected changes, like planning is not a one-time thing, right? This is happening all year long. And so what have you found being customer number one has been advantageous for you, specifically as sales leaders, to have a different level of visibility into your business and what some of these unexpected changes might mean in terms of the ripple effects of those?
Yeah, I think in the day and age of 2024, with AI and everything happening, real-time information should be the standard that comes through. And so being able to update everything in real time, whether it be a hire, a new deal happening, a deal pushing, and understanding how it simulates out quickly helps us make the right decisions. Because at the end of the day, you shouldn't have to stare at a bunch of Excel spreadsheets to understand your business. You should be able to take the busy work out of it and focus in on the strategies of how you raise that average sales price, how you get that next new deal coming in. Because anybody can input numbers on a spreadsheet. That's not the problem. The problem is actually how you do it. And so you need time to be focused. You need buy-in from all these folks that happen. You need training to happen with your team that goes through. And so what's been really important for us is to simulate out quickly in real time, taking that what used to happen in months down to minutes, and then taking that where we're going to move forward and then putting the strategy on how we're actually going to do it. It makes our cycles much quicker than they existed previously. And I feel so much more productive and feel like I can change and pivot on the fly because I know the market's changing so fast. I don't have to wait for my over pivoted Excel sheet and say, too bad, I can't actually do that. And that's what we're also hearing from other customers as well.
I think bringing talent into, we didn't talk much about it, but a part of a strategic plan for a year is hiring, firing, promoting, right? There's not only changes in accounts and changes to comp plans or process, all that, there's changes to people. So attracting talent, being a company that is able to get these things out quickly, that is able to make plans that get people to certain levels of attainment, not because the plan was easy, but because the company knows where they need to be and sets people up for success intentionally. Working strategically towards something like that is attractive and it retains talent. It helps talent want to move up in the organization and be more involved in that process. And then it brings in people that maybe want to be a desirable place to work. So I think all of those things really, having a good sales planning process in general helps also the company grow from a people perspective.
Everyone's sitting in those meetings that we were talking about at the beginning of the year. And in the back of their mind, what they're saying as you're presenting your plan is, can I be successful here this year?
Yeah.
Right. And if you, to your point before about attitude and confidence and knowledge, if your presentation and your articulation of that year's plan doesn't check all those boxes, then people are going to be sitting there questioning whether or not they can be successful in that place.
Yeah. At the end of the day, a lot of folks, I think maybe a misconception in sales as well is that we have 40% of the take home that is based on that plan that happens. And so sales in a way can be a lot of 1-year contracts that come through. They said they finish out their year and they understand will I be able to hit that number? Because, I always talk about sales planning takes place during tax season as well. And you have your accountant that asks you, hey, how much money are you going to make this year? And the answer really from a sales perspective sometimes is, I have no idea. It depends on what number I'm given and if I feel like I can achieve that. And that causes stress and anxiety. And so I think it's super important that you have that transparency down to the bottom level because you need to keep everybody in at that point in time. And the managers and leadership that can keep high level attainment, it's really important. And that creates another attractive place to work when you have people have 10 years of 3 or 4 years in a place as an IC versus, you're churning out your whole team every year. And that's costly. It's very tiring to enable everybody at that point in time. So that can be a key part of the sales planning process.
I think that's so important for ops people who are listening to hear, right? I think conceptually, we all know 50-50 split between base and variable, we get it. But those types of questions of man, can I put a down payment on a house this year? How is this going to impact somebody's livelihood? You have to, I think, approach this entire process respecting the fact that these decisions have huge ripple effects on people's lives. And so you have to treat them with that level of importance. And so I think it's awesome for folks to hear that perspective coming from you guys.
I think there's also a generational change in, the new sellers that are coming in have a different attitude about transparency, expectation, what they feel like a company should provide and the flexibility that needs to be involved in it. It's modernized, right? They have a different set of expectations than maybe the ones I started in when I first started in sales, which was, here's your job. Don't complain, do your job, and we'll keep you another year. It was this, you're just told what to do and expect.
That was Will saying that to you, right? To be right?
Never
will. But it was one of those, when I started, there was this level of expectation that was just kind of like, do as you were told. And there was also a lack of transparency in how and who got promoted, like how you went to the next level, how you got those accounts. There was a insider feel and an outsider feel at organizations that was acceptable. I think both the change in leadership, different generational swings, moving into leadership, things like that. We do things differently based on our experiences, but also there's another generation of people coming into the workforce that demand different expectations in the workplace. And I think that's a good thing. I think it's a good thing. I think it's evolving the sales profession. It's not just people that didn't make it in some other field, and so they're relying on sales to fall back on because anyone can do it or anything like that. People go to school and get degrees in this and formally trained to be experts in this field. And I think just the level of like entry level has really gone up.
Before we go, at the end of each show, we're going to ask each guest the same lightning round of questions. Ready? Here we go. We'll switch off. So we'll start with you, Anna. Best book you've read in the last 6 months? You can pass to Will if you want. Benefits of having two people here.
I reread recently the book Grit, Angela Duckwell, and from a business perspective, it's just my tried and true. I love reading it.
Nice. Will, I typically ask favorite part about working in ops, so I'll ask you favorite part about working with ops.
The data-driven mentality that has it. Like I love backwards math, and so using that data-driven side of things and just the brilliance of putting numbers together, but then putting the plan behind it is really important. And that's where I found the best partnership with the operations team.
Anna, you get the fun one. Least favorite part about working with ops?
They believe they're right all the time, that their data is right and that they are right. And a lot of times they are, but it takes a lot of convincing to overcome maybe some objections there.
That's a very good answer. Will, someone who helped you getting to the job you have today?
I'm going to go with my current CEO, Tracy Young. She got me involved early on at PlanGrid, and I got to see a company go from very small in revenue to over $100 million and into an acquisition, and learned a ton during that process. She gave me a shot back in 2014 at PlanGrid, and I could be forever grateful. And I hope that I could do that for somebody, or I hope I have done that for a lot of people throughout their career.
That's awesome. All right, last one I'm going to ask both of you. We'll start with you, Anna. One piece of advice for people who want to have your job someday.
It's the saying I always go back to: there are no shortcuts to any place worth going. So do the work, learn the lessons, and you'll get there.
Will?
Don't be a scoreboard watcher. I think the old school mentality of sales management is to just hit refresh on your Salesforce report, get your hands dirty, talk to customers, do the job that your reps are actually doing. And what you'll find is a lot of problems that you can help solve, but also you create a good team environment that says that person's willing to do everything that I have to do. And you're not beneath doing anything. So you should be hopping on calls. You should be making cold calls. You should be doing demos yourself, not 24/7, but don't just be someone who's counting up the numbers in the close won and saying, why is it close loss? Do the job actually.
Thanks so much to Will and Anna for joining me on this week's episode of Operations. And thanks to Christina from the Tiger Eye team for reaching out and setting up the interview in the first place. If you like what you heard today, make sure you're subscribed to our show. A new episode comes out in your feed every other Friday. Also, if you prefer a video version of this, we have a YouTube channel. Search for Operations with Sean Lane on YouTube, and you can subscribe to our channel there. If you learned something today from Will or Anna or from any of our episodes, make sure you leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. It really helps people find the show. 6-star reviews only. All right, that's going to do it for me. Thanks so much for listening. We'll see you next time.